Not at all. It just gets a little bit samey after a while. You start being able to predict things before they happen. And then, unfortunately, we come on to what I think is this game's single biggest issue. Something that makes me both very uncomfortable and rather angry. As such, in order to maintain my cool during these next segments, I may well have to take a few deep breaths from time to time. Oh yes, because that won't be distracting at all. This game is rated for adults only, a rating that you can pretty much only get by including graphic sexual content. This is not what bothers me. I happen to believe that as a society we should be a lot less uptight about sex than we are. No, the problem I have is that at the point of the game that I am up to, which I would say is probably a good halfway through, all of the sex so far has been non-consensual. How much are we talking about here? About a half dozen scenes, beginning with our main character being kidnapped and raped by a buxom spider woman. This is of course played for comedy because this game does not seem to realise that a man being orally stimulated until he ejaculates against his will is still rape. We then have a deeply uncomfortable scene in which one of our villains attempts to rape Ruri, the aforementioned leader of the Haddo group, a woman who I only believe is 18 because the manual makes specific mention of that fact. And of course, tentacles come into play in that one. It's always tentacles. Thankfully, that one is interrupted by some extreme violence, which was certainly what my blood pressure needed at the time. Unfortunately, we then have another scene later in which our main character of Kuru is exposed to some odd gas and sexually assaults Al-Azif. The fact she manages to talk him down from actually raping her is frankly a good thing, but ultimately it made me realise that almost the exact same thing happened in Princess Evangile, which makes me wonder, what is it with Japanese visual novels and making our characters almost rapists? Is it perhaps some cultural thing? God, I hope not, or the culture is really messed up. If you want to include sexual content in your video game, I don't have a problem with that. However, you have to handle it in the right way. The exact same thing goes for elements of sexual violence. I don't necessarily believe that they should be outside the bounds of things that you can include. But if you are going to do it, you should never, ever play it for comedy. It does not matter if we are talking about a male perpetrator, a female perpetrator, or a male victim or a female victim. Because ultimately, rape is not funny in any context. And frankly, to the victims, it's just not a joke of any kind at all. Are you all right? Not particularly, but I think that stuff needed to be said. If you can get past that particularly thorny issue, the rest of Demonbane's story isn't half bad. It has a lot of elements that I really do like. I love the Lovecraftian stuff, the whole otherworldly horrors clawing at the bounds of our reality, struggling to get in idea. And for what it's worth, I like most of the characters. Al and Ruri are a bit stuck up in their own ways, but they have an awful lot of good byplay between them. And overall, I do genuinely like them. Though I will admit, I think the only character in the plot I really respect is Ruri's butler, a man who is equal parts Terminator and Alfred from Batman. I thought you were attempting to avoid Batman references. Well, I did, but frankly that one was just way too obvious not to use. Honestly, by far the best character in the game is Dr. West. And that's largely because he's just the typical archetypal mad scientist, constantly coming up with new giant robots to try and defeat you, while he wails away on his electric guitar. He is the most fun character because he's the only one who seems to realise how ridiculous everything is, and just runs with it. Unfortunately, I think the game overuses him just a bit. And yet he manages to stay fun? Well, for the most part. Demonbane's story has a lot of good elements to it. I like the central idea, the characters are pretty interesting, and the translation has actually done a pretty good job. Unfortunately, the elements that I dislike overshadow it to the point where when I try and remember any specifics, I can only remember the stuff that I hated. And that, honestly, makes the entire story something of a mixed bag. The art is not great. There's two main reasons for this. The first is that most of the images are pretty low res. They were, after all, made in 2006, and as a result they don't stretch particularly well to a modern monitor. This is especially true of the background images, a lot of which look a little bit on the pixely side. The second issue I have... well, just look.
This is Naya, and just look at her. There's sexualized characters, and then there's just taking the piss.
Those are not breasts. Those are space hoppers. If she tried to walk anywhere, she would fall over immediately and end up bouncing her way right down the street. And while that's one very specific example, it's emblematic of a problem that a lot of the art has. It feels very juvenile. There's way too many unnecessary panty shots and way too many things that are sexually suggestive to the point where I had to black box them because, frankly, I wasn't sure if I could get away with them on YouTube. With that said, however, there are an awful lot of CGs, and it's pretty clear that's where the art team put most of their effort. And I will freely admit to liking the design of Demonbane itself because, well, just look at it.
As many of you will know, I love giant robots, and this is no exception. It's just a pity that half the time we can barely see it.
While I like the designs, it is worth noting that a lot of the fight images are very stylized, and as a result you may have trouble telling what's actually going on. Overall, the art is very much like the story. It's a mixed bag. What's good is good, but what's bad is just plain stupid. I don't particularly like the audio for this game. The music isn't particularly great, and some of the tracks are frankly just weird and kind of annoying. The voice acting is in Japanese, and so therefore I turned it off immediately, because I'm one of those people whose brain just will not handle hearing one language while reading another. For all I know, it could be some of the best acting ever recorded. I will never find out. The sound effects, yeah, they're not bad at all, although I will freely admit that the ones while we're piloting Demonbane could do with having a little bit more weight behind them. Overall, the audio is pretty lacking. So, did I enjoy Deus Machina Demonbane? That is an odder question than usual, because in all honesty, I think I would really have enjoyed the version of this game that came out on PS2, because that version had all the sexual content removed. While I am not averse to sexual content in video games, the way it is handled here is, to my mind, extremely juvenile and just drags the entire experience down for me. I want to like this game, and there are elements of it that I do, but I just can't get over that, I'm afraid. Should you buy it? Well, that's probably a fairly redundant question, given that A, getting a copy is quite tricky, and B, anyone watching a review of Deus Machina Demonbane in 2015 is probably a massive fan of it, who's going to be angry that I'm being as down on it as I am. In all honesty, I don't think it was worth the price I paid for it, especially given that it's a 10-year-old game that I had to pay full price for, plus international shipping. At the end of the day, it's not bad, but it's got one major element that drags it down significantly in my mind. If you can see past that, more power to you. But to me, it just ruins the experience completely and makes it a deeply uncomfortable game for me to play. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe Martin has something that he's been meaning to get round to telling me for a week. I'll see you later. So, what did you find?
Oh, so now you want to know.
Stop being pissy and just tell me. Did you find anything?
Yes and no. I was able to glean an impression, so to speak. A remnant of Shah's thoughts.
And that helps us how?
Well, I now possess a psychic imprint of Shah's intended victim. Not enough to give us a name or a face, unfortunately, but certainly enough that when we meet them, I will know.
Well, that's something, I suppose. So what do we do now? Just march you around the streets of Newcastle hoping we bump into this individual?
I doubt that would work, unfortunately. While I might have the imprint, it will still take me at least a moment to get a good read on someone when I meet them. I'm afraid all we can do for the moment is wait.
Oh, that'll be fun. Want to get some lunch?
I could eat.
Spiffing!
And I suspect we have an interesting time ahead of us.